So I tell these kids, whether I'm in an assembly or in a one-on-one coaching session, there's two wolves in your mind. And you have one in the dark, negativity, and you have the other in the light, positivity. But the real question is, which wolf wins? And it's the one you feed.
Hey, it's Adam, the Back Factory podcast, where we unpack past experiences to help define a better future. Today, we're going to be unpacking change, 1% at a time, that is. My guest, Caden Vittorini, he is a Amazon bestselling author, a TEDx speaker, a youth life coach, and the owner of the Vit Factor since 2022. Caden, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to today.
Man, I have been following your journey for a couple years now. I told you before we jumped on that I've had Les Thomas on the podcast as well as Marcus Black. And Marcus, I saw a video with you, and one of the things that just really spoke to me is the amount of passion you have, the amount of energy, especially whenever it comes to impacting our youth. And so let's start off a little bit. Why don't you just tell us about yourself and what exactly is the Vit Factor and who is Caden?
Yeah. So my name is Caden Vittorini. I'm 22 years old, and I feel like because of my age, being 22, I always say I'm young, relatable, and relevant. So going into these elementary, middle schools, high schools, doing these coaching, these workshops and assemblies, I'm able to connect with them that much more. So that is the Vit Factor. I am the leader of our youth. I like to say I have impacted over tens of thousands of kids across Illinois. I've been down to Texas, Indiana, teaching them life skills. So skills, how to have a conversation, feel confidence when meeting new people, how to believe in themselves and have that confidence through every moment they face, how to have positivity in their life, whether it's in their mind or through their actions, and also touching on some topics like not comparing themselves to others, to what they see on social media, to what they hear in a conversation. So I go in, I talk about these things, and investing in yourself is cool, is what I like to say. Being back to high school and middle school 8 years ago, I thought it was cool. What I thought was cool, though, I now realize was actually lame, not being thankful and appreciative. I was hanging on the wrong crowd. I had no control over my life. I was doing things that would get me in trouble. I thought that was cool. So I go in and teach them these things that are real, and I bring the energy. I make it motivational, heartfelt, and a lot of learning and interactive as well. So that is what Vit Factor is.
That's really cool, man. That's very, very cool. I love that. How did you get into this? Like, what was the catalyst that kind of evoked you to really start investing in the youth?
Yeah. So I was starting off with another coaching brand and just helping out, doing some volunteering, some leadership work. And what happened was a lot of the parents were coming to her and saying, "You're a great, but who's Caden? My son or daughter wants to work with him as well." And that's where I realized I had that gift. And in that moment, I saw what was happening in our youth from COVID-19, the pandemic, social isolation through technology, social media, gaming, where there's a big gap there in a lot of these life skills that I mentioned previously a few minutes ago. They don't know how to have a conversation. They aren't motivated. They don't believe in themselves. And these skills are so important. I truly believe these kids in our youth are future leaders, change makers, and innovators. So if they don't have these simple life skills that, you and I grew up with, Adam, what is their future going to look like when they get to maybe high school, in college, and then maybe graduate and go into the workforce? If they don't have these simple things, they're going to struggle. So that's where I come in and teach them these things that I knew someone had to do something about it. And we make investing in yourself fun too. You should want to better yourself. You should want to invest into becoming that best version of yourself. You should realize that you have the power to create that life you want to live. Yes, it'll take time, but that's where I teach them also my motto, becoming 1% better every single day.
That's so cool, dude. So you worked for a previous coaching company.
Yep.
And then you went out on your own. I do a lot of research. Have you ever read The Body Keeps the Score?
I haven't read it. I've heard of it though.
So it was one of the best books I've ever read, especially in the area of childhood psychology and really looking at how traumatic experiences, especially from a very young age, specifically the 0 to 5 age range when you're developing about 95% your emotional responses. And whenever I read that book, I then started going and looking at more childhood psychology just to understand how children develop. I'm a single dad, so I got a daughter. So I wanted to kind of understand the dynamics of what exactly she's walking into. And some of the research is very alarming whenever it comes to what we're exposing children to and how we are not training them these skills to simply have communication techniques with other human beings. They're more comfortable whenever it comes to texting. And statistically speaking, texting raises cortisol levels. And so whenever your cortisol levels are raised at a very, very young age, whenever you're supposed to be learning how to communicate, learning how to ask for needs from your parents, but you don't have that ability, you then get into your adolescent years, 10 to 18, which is you deal with. And a lot of that processing, a lot of that development, a lot of that pruning, synaptic pruning has already been completed. And it's very difficult to kind of reroute those things. What are some of the most effective methods that you've found to help these kids wake up and realize that they need to change?
Yeah. So I always say our youth, they can text, but can't talk. They can comment, but can't connect. So I really teaching them these simple tips and techniques, how to start, expand, and end a conversation are very important. So starting with the beginning, I talk about body language is how you present yourself. It's literally your energy and attitude before you even say your first words. So making those instant tweaks can show everyone that you're approachable, can lead to you having natural confidence by fixing your posture, not fidgeting, throwing a smile on your face, and making eye contact with others. And especially if they're a kid that's saying, why don't I have many friends? Why don't people want to talk to me? Is your head buried in your phone? Are you slouching for the time? For you not showing that you're an approachable person? That's even before the conversation starts. So if they don't have important part of a conversation, presenting themselves the right way, they can't expect a successful conversation from there. But then leading into it, how to make a proper introduction and how it takes 7 seconds to make a first impression. Types of questions they're asking, ways to connect and how to build strong friendships, which leads into looking at who's in their circle, making sure they're surrounding themselves with the right friends, which usually comes in around age 13, 14.
That's awesome, dude. 7 seconds to make a first impression. How did you come up with the 7 seconds to make a first impression? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I actually just read it in a book. It's in the book Make Today Count, and that's probably one that I've really been enjoying that I'm reading right now currently.
That's cool, dude. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, whenever in that first 7 seconds, it's interesting. 7 seconds is the measure. I would love to see the research on that because it's like, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Like your auditory, your visual, your emotional, your hormonal response is all really engaged and you're heightened in that first 7 seconds, which makes a tremendous amount of sense. I do have a very interesting question as we talk through this.
Yeah.
What is the most formative challenge that you encounter whenever it comes to working one-on-one with kids?
I would say it's tough. I have 2 routes I could go. I would say they kind of tie to one another, but they're the lack of motivation, right? They have no drive to go out there and make new friends. They have no drive to push themselves in school, in sports. So the lack of motivation, and I feel like that starts, which was the other direction I was going to go down, is the negativity. The negative self-talk is what I see all the time. Walking into a test, what are you saying to yourself? When you wake up first thing in the morning, what are you telling your mind? Are you saying, oh, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to sports. I don't want to spend time with family or friends. How do you expect your day to go well? You're setting yourself up for not a successful day. So I feel like it starts with that negativity, that negative self-talk, which then branches into the lack of motivation. So those are the 2 areas that I feel like is within a lot of kids. And there's an analogy that I talk about with them, and it's getting them to really understand the power of negative versus positive self-talk. So I tell these kids, whether I'm in an assembly or in a one-on-one coaching session, there's 2 wolves in your mind. And you have one in the dark, negativity. And you have the other in the light, positivity. But the real question is, which wolf wins? And it's the one you feed. For me, in the past, I was, like I said in the beginning, hanging around the wrong crowd, procrastinating, had no control over my life. I was feeding the negative wolf. But the other one was remembering the values my family taught me, realizing that if I made the right decision, it'd bring myself and others around me a positive result. And then I turned it back to them to say, okay, let's identify your 2 wolves. What are you battling every single day? And that's where I'm able to connect with them because everybody has those 2 wolves, especially at a young age. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you're good at, your friendships, all these different things. What are you feeding? And what results are you seeing because of that?
So good. It's really funny you say that. You didn't know this for you started either. So I have a men's group that meets every Tuesday night at my house. We've been meeting for 2 years, and our acronym for the group is FTGW, Feed the Good Wolf.
Nice. That's
And so
awesome.
I love that analogy. It's very simple. It's funny. Every
Yeah.
time someone starts with our group, and they ask about it, tell the story of the grandpa and the young kid, which is the first way that I heard that story. And so I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful, the fact that you're breaking down these analogies in very simplistic terms.
Yeah.
Something you said really speaks to me, and I'm curious to get your insight on this because these kids are conditioned to think that way, right?
Yeah.
And those conditions are based off of what they're consuming. More importantly, their living environment.
Yeah.
How do you deal with whenever you have a kid that's coming to you and they are living in a condition to where they either have a sibling or a parent that constantly has that conditioning and they're getting it from that? How do you encourage a child to work through that whenever their environment is dictating their ability to actually create that new positive outlook?
Yeah. So I really do talk about the power of your life, right? At the end of the day, it's you versus you. So the only thing you could really control at the end of the day is the way you think. I know it's so tough because everybody has different lives, whether they're facing a challenge themselves, having to overcome an obstacle, or even an outside source like a parent or a sibling that is always focused on like that negativity. It's what you take into your mind. If you're going to let that affect you, then it will affect you, right? But if you say, okay, take control of my mindset and I want the best for myself, let me focus on feeding the right wolf. Let me focus on that positive stuff. And after I work on with them with this in any area, maybe it's their friend or something at home, or maybe it's social media that's bringing them this negativity. That next week when we meet, I'll ask them for the results that they've seen. So you put yourself in a negative mindset. How do you switch it to a positive mindset? What'd you do to do this? And what did you notice from there? So getting them to realize like, hey, okay, I remember for an example, I've been working with a client who is struggling in school. So his thing is always a negative mindset, walk into a quiz or test. Well, I'm like, bro, you can't just walk into the test saying, I'm going to fail it before you even start it. That doesn't make sense. So what he's been doing, what I've been working on with him is, hey, let's focus on having a positive mindset, what you tell yourself, and he's actually seen his performance go up, right? But what you're telling yourself before you go into it, and especially as you're taking it, how do you expect to have good results? So that's just a perfect example of, you have control over your mind. And I know off track there from what your initial question was, but at the end of the day, having them understand that it's you versus you, right? You're going to grow up and nobody's going to come to save you. So these skills that you implement into your life now, it's going to make your future that much easier.
I love that, man. I had a whole podcast where I talked about the trap of victimization. And it's very easy to fall into that, especially as you get older, because you're right. You only have control over certain things, especially as you get older. And it's very easy if you program yourself to where it's always someone else's fault. You can't do anything about it. You go into that negative self-talk. You start programming yourself anytime you run into a stressful environment to fall into those negative neural pathways and those negative cycles. And as a kid, I mean, shit, man, whenever you're going through your synaptic pruning process, which is supposed to happen during your most neuroelastic states, which is 0 to 18 years old, you're programming. I mean, one of the craziest stats that I've ever read is when you're a child and you're developing, especially in your formative years, you can create up to 1 million neurons per second. As you get older and you're creating those synaptic processes, you start pruning them off. But in those adolescent years, especially whenever you go through puberty, you had a lot of hormonal imbalances and hormonal changes. It makes it to where you're really solidifying the way that emotionally you're going to respond to situations the rest of your life. And so programming yourself to choose the positive over the negative so that you don't become a victim is something that I think our country and our world has really fallen trapped to where, you just validate everybody. You just validate them. Hey, it's okay. It's all right. You should feel that way. Don't get me wrong. Everybody should be allowed to express their feelings, but in that same regard, the power of positive thinking and taking ownership over who you are and what you do and what you think is powerful. Who's your, what is the first book you ever read about this that kind of sparked your interest?
Ooh. Oh man, I don't know if I can remember the first exact book.
What's the most impactful book that you've read about this exact topic?
I haven't read this in a long time, but How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think is a really,
It's great.
yeah,
Dale
great book. It's
Carnegie.
been a while, but
Yeah.
that's what I can strictly remember. It's around this topic of what we've been talking about.
I love that book, man. It's one of my favorite books. Funny, whenever I used to do sales and I was a road warrior, I would, if I would go into a sale and I all of a sudden lost the sale for some reason, I would go to that book and I'd look at the chapters and I'd be like, all right, who was I dealing with? What was their personality type? And what chapter can I read through? And I mean, it's an ancient myth. It's like the Bible, right? Like those stories from the Bible are applicable to us today just because it's human psychology. I don't know if you've read this or not, but I'm currently in the middle of Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Have you ever read Joe Dispenza?
Yes.
So this book, dude, I was mowing the lawn yesterday, and as I'm mowing the lawn, I'm listening to it.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to what you're talking about, where if you can get the mind in a place to where it's always seeking the positive versus seeking the negative, you would program yourself and you start programming your body to start looking for opportunities, to start looking for ways to grow. And I think that speaks to the 1% better. How did you, or what would a life look like if you got 1% better every day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I feel like people can achieve anything, right? If you believe in yourself and it does start in your mind, you get to program your mind. And when I go into these schools or coaching or workshops, I'm real with them, right? In a respectful, of course, way, but I'm hard on them because I want to see them succeed. Where if they can just say, okay, how can I become better than I was yesterday? Reflecting on the day before, the night before, moving past that. Right? You can't control what happened in the past. You can control the present to decide the future. So when you wake up saying, "Oh, I might have lost a friend yesterday, but how can I find a better one today? I might not have, done well in my sports game, but this game tonight, how can I come back even stronger?" That's how you become percent better, is reflecting on your past. And instead of getting down on yourself, saying, hey, maybe it didn't go my way. Maybe I did fail. Really. Maybe I made a mistake that I shouldn't have. But how can I come back stronger to prevent that moving forward? If you're always doing that through a positive lens, a positive self-talk mindset, you're going to become unstoppable. Those goals and dreams that you have for yourself, they will be achieved. But it does start in your mind because at the end of the day, it controls everything. And like you said, going back earlier, that age between when you're born in 18, I've heard that before, but I haven't thought about it in a while, how it produces the million per second. That's absolutely crazy. And it is something that is lacking nowadays, no matter what age you are, where what you're programming your mind between those first 18 years is everything, right? It's going to control the way you think, so on, after you graduate high school around then.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a crazy statistic. I that literally blew me away. And my dad used to work with schools back in the day. He worked for a company called Character First, doing somewhat similar to what you're doing. And through that process, they used to have a saying, and I use this today whenever I'm coaching. I deal with mostly businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs, guys that are retiring and trying to figure out what their purpose is. That's kind of my niche. And it's right. Whenever you're dealing with kids, it's really cool because the way you're talking about it, you're teaching them to understand who they are. And that's something that nobody can ever take away from them, right? It's who you were created to be, who you are, not what you do, because what you do is going to change. It's completely circumstantial. Who you are is the decisions you make based off of what your ethics, what your morals, what your principles, and ultimately what your programming is. And I think that's really what you're speaking to whenever it comes to the amount of passion and belief. And I just love seeing that in you, dude, especially what are 22 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nuts. I do have a question. I want to circle back because we didn't really touch on this, but
yeah,
when you run into those kids and you're doing the one-on-one coaching, right?
Yeah.
And the parent is a reoccurring theme. Do you have the opportunity to work with parents and children at the same time? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so for the one-on-one coaching, I only offer just me and the child, because I feel like they tend to open up a lot more if the parent's not in the picture or around that
Yeah.
situation. But I've had parents come to me and say, "Hey, I need some help on this, right? How do I understand my child?" Or also even principals and teachers have done the same. "Hey, students going through this. How should we respond in the right way to connect with them that much more?" So, whether they're a principal or teacher or and have students or a mom or dad with their son or
Yeah.
daughter. So I do only offer one-on-one coaching with the child, but then I have had parents that I'll set up phone calls with them and I'll talk and tell them what I'm seeing with their kid. They'll be like, yes, I'm seeing that, but how can I come in to connect with them that much more?
Do you work more with parents or do you work more with schools or is it in collaboration? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's in collaboration. I would say all the parents will come to me for a one-on-one coaching for the child, and then it'll be usually like a social worker, administrator, a principal that will reach out for in a school assembly. So workshop for a school assembly could be anywhere from 20 to 50 kids. But then I've
Mhm.
done school assemblies from 50 to 2,000 kids. So it could be the whole school, it could be a specific grade level, and then it's just a variety of topics depending on their age.
So, Caden, we just went through, I don't want to talk about politics, but I do want to bring this up because you
Yeah.
are in the industry and I think it's very important to address. I'd love to get your perspective on this because it's been a discussion that I've had with a lot of people whenever it comes to the future of business, the future of education.
Yeah.
And, the current administration just completely decimated the, Department of Education and basically said let's restart it. Now, I'm like, well, it's too extreme, but I do think that we have some educational standards and educational issues
Yeah.
in our school today that is really, it's not headed in the right direction. We've been falling in the rankings for years upon years upon years whenever it comes to education. I mean, shoot, I look at my daughter and I'm like, would I be better off homeschooling her? I was homeschooled growing up and
Yeah.
I'm a self thinker. I don't think based off of generalities because I didn't go through the system.
Yeah.
If you were in charge of the education system and they were like, hey, listen, Caden, I want you, based off of your knowledge, your interactions with these kids one on one, what are some things that you would immediately today start doing to actually change the educational system here in America?
Yeah, so I think some things that they do teach is important, like the simple math, multiplication, division, addition, stuff like that. How to read, how to spell. These are things that are a must. But then it gets into more advanced things that are completely out of the picture, right? Especially, for an example, if they have like a math problem that's taking 20 minutes, right? Or if they have a science experiment that's taking 2 hours to do. I just feel like there's so many other skills that should be being taught starting from a young age. For an example, second graders, third, fourth, fifth graders, they should be teaching how to have a conversation, how to make a proper introduction, how to build the right friends, how to figure out if you are in the right circle, leading to maybe middle school. Okay, let's set some goals for you. How do you achieve the goals through your actions that you take? What does your mind
Mhm.
to look like? What daily habits do you have to stay consistent through? And how do you find good daily habits? So all these different things that I feel like are missing and are
Mhm.
needed regardless if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an entrepreneur, or even a teacher. You'll need these important skills. And they're not being taught. And especially it's worse when their heads, like we talked about earlier, their heads are buried in their phone. They're only playing video games, watching TV all day and night. They're not even consuming good stuff. It's not like they're learning good things. They're consuming poor things, which is then holding them back even more. So I would add in a lot of these skills that I feel like are much needed, especially at the elementary, middle school range.
I'll tell you right now, man, Murray Sargent, at some point, you probably need to, if you really want to make an impact, you need to look at either getting into politics or you need to look at getting into lobbying or you need to look at somehow getting involved whenever it comes to that. Because you're exactly right. AI is something which we were talking about right before we got on here because I'm really
Yeah.
trying to help people. I mean, my daughter, last night, I sat down with my daughter. I kid you not. And I was like, hey, we were drawing on my screen and we were drawing some pictures. And I was like, hey, honey, and she's 3. I was like, I'm going to show you how to work with AI to actually create something. What do you want to create? And she was
Uh,
like, a bunny. So we literally created a pink bunny and I had her type in the prompts. And like, as funny as that might be, like, we have really neglected to change the way that the system works based off of what is needed, but not just with technology. We rely on technology to do all of our communication. So either technology is using you as its tool or you are using technology as its tool.
Yep.
And we typically rely on technology so much to deal with our emotional responses, which are not good long term. And so the younger that we can teach these kids how to basically take control of their life, understand human connection, understand the place of technology, but not for technology to control them, the sooner that we can break this, in my opinion, unhealthy automation of leaning on technology to just take care of everything, because that's not the way we were created. And that is shown whenever you got 52% of Americans on some kind of SSRI, an antidepressant. And kids as young as 10, 8 years old are getting put on Adderall. Are you kidding me? They're kids. They're kids. And you're going to put the kid on Adderall? Are you kidding me? They're just a kid. Like, I look at parents and they're like sitting there looking at their kid throwing a fit and whatever. It's like they're emotionally expressing themselves. That doesn't mean that they're depressed and they need to be put on an SSRI. That means that they need more interaction. It means that they need more people like Caden that are actually talking to them, that are actually having discussions with them. You know?
That's exactly what's happened. A lot of parents have actually come to me saying, hey, you know, my son or daughter on anxiety medicine or depression pills. And, you know, they're on it and they're 12 years old. And then I work with them for, we'll call it 6 sessions, right? So a 6 package of sessions, and they don't need it anymore because they're more positive. They're more motivated. They believe in themselves more. They actually have goals that they're setting for themselves. And from there, they're starting to be happier. They're starting to make more time with their family and their friends. They're starting to just like level up themselves in every aspect of their life. And these are the simple things that are so simple, but they're so needed that aren't being taught anywhere. And a lot of parents are doing a great job, but if a parent might not be, then how's their son or daughter going to look? And if it leads to them having anxiety and depression, and then leads to them having no friends and not pushing them in school, it's really tough to pull them out of the downward spiral. I've worked with kids who have been in like a tough upbringing that just have this, pretty much sucks to say, but want to just give up on life. And it's very hard for me to just sit there and hear this kid talk about how they view themselves and view their life. But it started with little things. They didn't know how to have a conversation, so they couldn't make new friends. Now they feel alone. They didn't have goals that they were setting themselves for, so they just felt like they had no ambition and drive for life. They were just going through the motions and letting life take them wherever. So what I'm teaching, I feel like, is so important and very much needed.
Yeah, I love that, dude. You literally just nailed it on the head. I think that, are you saying, this is something I'm interested in. Are you, do you ever have follow-ups with these kids to where, you start noticing that after you're meeting with them, they start engaging with their parents, which then causes there to be a relational change with the parents?
All the time. Happens
Crazy.
Week where parents will text me and be like, hey, he actually was not on his phone during dinner tonight. He was actually talking about his day at school and within sports. I've had teachers say, hey, some of my students actually created a homework club. They want to become better in school. So little things like that, they're starting to take action behind it. And from a parent perspective, seeing their son or daughter make that change, they're like, wow, this is the best investment that I made in them. And this is something that they needed 5, 6 years ago. But if it was taught at a young age when they can actually start to think and talk and do things for themselves a little bit, that's where it really counts. And that's where it's going to set them up for that ultimate level of success in any area.
Yeah, dude, I could go down the whole parent route. I mean, we really have, I hope if a parent listens to this, if there's one thing that they hear as you're talking, I hope that they hear that they need to put their phone down more. They need to go interact with their child. They need to work with their child, and they need to give their child attention, because that ultimately is what kids need. They need attention.
Yeah.
And just putting them on a device and not investing in them is not going to solve the problem. And so you're bringing to light, you're really focusing on an epidemic that we have right now. And I love what you're doing. Let me, we've got a few minutes left. You obviously got where you're at today for a reason. So what was it like growing up for Caden? Like, tell me your upbringing up to the point to where you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I had the best parents that really took care of me, wanted the best for me, led me down the right path in every sort of aspect. But then when it really started making a change for me was probably junior, senior year of high school. And that's where I started going down not the best path, where I was around the wrong crowd. making poor decisions. I didn't manage my time. I had procrastinated everything, which led my grades to drop down. In sports, I was very good at sports, but I wasn't wanting to become better. I wasn't doing anything to become better. So I didn't
Mm.
have like a horrible upbringing, but it was a good upbringing until like my junior, senior year of high school. And then my freshman year of college just went downhill, right? I had lost control of my life. My grades were in the dump, horrible. I was making poor decisions, getting in trouble. I was playing college sport at
Mm.
Western Michigan University. And what happened was because of my habits, decisions, and my mindset, I ended up just making excuses on skipping practice when I was on a scholarship. Hey, coach, I got to study for a
Mm.
test coming on Monday. I can't make the game on Saturday or Sunday. Things like that. So I started going on a really bad path and realizing that I had to look in the mirror. I had to take control of my life. And it was in that moment where 2.5 months in from college, building up since junior year of high school, where my mom and dad had an honest kind of conversation with me. When they saw me for the first time around Thanksgiving, they said, Caden, you may not like what I'm about to say, but it's the truth. And they told me the truth, even though deep down I didn't want to hear it. And later that night,
Mm.
when I went upstairs and looked in the mirror, is the first time I saw what they saw. And that's where I realized I had to flip the switch where if I didn't now, then what would my life look like now being 3 years later?
Dude, that is so impactful, man. I'm so grateful that you, for a couple of reasons, for all the kids you're impacting, I'm glad that you hit that point. I'm grateful for your parents that they had the hard conversation.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed. I was raised two-parent household. My mom passed away last year, but besides that, my parents were together my whole life. I mean, I went down a destructive path for years. It's not about my story, but for other reasons. But, I made a lot of very poor decisions. But the biggest thing that I've learned, or one of the biggest things I've learned, my mom told me growing up, she was like, your spiritual gift is being a mercy.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, so for my whole life, I thought being a mercy was you walk around and tell everybody what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, about 3 or 4 years ago that I realized being a mercy is actually telling people what they need to hear when they need to hear it versus what they want to hear when they don't need to hear it. And
Mhm.
so having those hard conversations is very uncomfortable. And we live in a society today that wants to validate everybody and wants to make them feel good about themselves and wants to tell them, oh, whatever you want. And we're like, really? That's not what people are looking for. Like, they're looking for people to have a hard conversation with them. They are looking for people that are going to hold them to a higher standard. And so, I'm grateful that your parents had that conversation. And I'm grateful that you're out there having these conversations with people and making that impact and eliciting that change. And not to mention, you are doing that change, Caden. And so I think God has just got a super powerful plan in your life, man. I am extremely excited to see where exactly you go. I'm excited to support you in any way that I can, because what you're doing is you are actually doing the change, both you yourself being that person, and they're also going in and taking action to change it, because so many people just sit on their hands and they'll become social media warriors to where they're like, well, this needs to change or this needs to change. No, you have to be able to change. You have to go step in. I had a guy named, which I need to hook you up to, I'm going to hook you up with Akash Patel.
Yeah.
He works for the United Nations and he works all over the world bringing virtual collaborations between school students. So he'll go to one school and set up a webcam with a student in China or somewhere in India or whatever so that they can communicate with kids virtually.
Yeah.
And the title of our podcast was, stepping into the gap whenever you see a gap. And that's what you're doing. You saw a problem. You said, I could continue to be a part of the problem, or I can change myself and then go be
Yes.
the change you want to see.
Yeah.
And I love that for you, dude.
I
That's
appreciate it.
incredible. That's incredible. If someone wants to get a hold of you, we're coming to the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
If someone wants to get a hold of you, if they want to support you, tell us a little bit about how exactly they could do that.
Yeah, so my website is vitfactor.com. So that's V as in Victor, ITT, factor with an F.com. And then social media is vit.factor. I'm big on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok. So reach out, follow me. I'll give you a follow back, show me some love, and then we'll definitely connect and see how we can collaborate or how I can impact your child or your school in any sort of way.
Love that. Now I got 2 questions we end every podcast in.
Yeah.
First one, kind of necessarily, not really, but if there was one book, we got listeners that are listening to it.
Yeah.
And there was one book that someone could read, what would that book be and why?
Yeah, so I'm going to there's so many good books that a lot of people hear about, but I'm going to give my book a shout out. It's actually becoming the 1%, and my motto is 1% better every single day. And what I did, Adam, it's not just me. I actually brought together a lot of my close lifelong friends since elementary, middle school, or also, excuse me, entrepreneurs. We all came together and we wrote our own book together. So we each have our own
Mhm.
chapters throughout that book. And that book is very vulnerable, showing where we were at in our life and what we had to
Mhm.
do to pull ourselves out of that. And I say that because our big focus today was with the youth. So if you have a son or daughter, or if you work within a school, this book would be so good for them specifically because we were telling this book or writing this book when at we started writing it a couple years ago, but it really started branching out this past couple months. But it was stories from elementary, middle school, high school, and me for college. All those different experiences we share within it. We're vulnerable. We show there's some humor to get them thinking a little bit and laughing, and then also how they can make that same change for themselves, no matter what they're
Mhm.
going, any challenge or obstacle that they may be facing at the moment.
I love that, dude. It's really cool. I'm gonna have to check it out now. I'm gonna have to check it out, and we'll plug it into the YouTube comments. Second question: if there's one person that has impacted you the most whenever it comes to changing your life, who would that person be and why?
I'm gonna give two quick shout outs, okay? So the first one is I'm gonna say my mom. She has been there for me since day one. She really has believed in me through the thick and thin when other people didn't, and she has taught me a lot that I know today. So big shout out to my mom, and then also Rachel Weaver, who has been probably the biggest connection that I've ever had within my company. So my mom's more on like the my life and personal side of things, but then Rachel's more on like the business side of things, where she actually has taken me to a whole other level. She's introduced me to many big connections. She's given me many big opportunities, and she wants to see me succeed in every aspect, not just as a person, but within my business as well. So please shout out Rachel Weaver as well, because she has been a big part of my journey through Vid Factor.
It's cool, man. That's awesome. Well, I think it's important to recognize the people in our lives that have impacted us the most, and so that's why I always ask that question.
Yeah.
If, in summary, if in 60 seconds
Yeah.
you could look into the camera and you could take all of this and compile it
Yeah.
into why someone should be the change or why they should change.
Yeah.
Look at the camera and tell whoever's out there why they should be the change. What would you say?
I would say that you have one life, right? And your odds being born were 1 in 400 trillion. So you're here for a reason, right? Your goal should be to unlock your full purpose. And it starts with the little things. I want you to take a step back and relax for a second and ask yourself, when is the last time I looked in the mirror and had a truthful conversation with myself, with who I'm
Hmm.
becoming, what my life looks like, and the path that I'm going down every single day? How am I bettering myself? How am I bettering those around me? And the little things that you learned today in today's podcast, from the communication to becoming 1% better, positive self talk, motivation, all these different areas, ask yourself, how do they look in my life? Because in order to find your purpose, one, you have the power to do that. You are the creator of your life and what you want to achieve. You have to realize that it will take time. So becoming 1% better every single day is so important, but also investing in yourself, realizing that it's cool that you have to do that for yourself. And if you want anything bad enough, a goal or dream of yours, you have the power to make that happen by believing in yourself, being positive, growing your confidence, staying motivated throughout the journey.
It's good. Caden, this has been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait until one day we can actually work together, collaborate.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll happen sometime here in the near future. And then just keep on going, dude, because what you're doing is something that our world needs today more so than ever before, where we live in a divided and very polarized culture. So I'm very
Amen.
proud of you, man. And I can't wait to see what God does. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Amen. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Well, till next time on the Backpack Fairy podcast, thanks for tuning in.